Look, let's get stuck into the first piece that I wanted to discuss, which is the recent, well, at least your tweet as a response to the recent marriage special by Jordan Peterson, which, mind you, I haven't watched yet, but I think I could, knowing Jordan's work quite well and following your work, I could kind of make out, what he said. So talk me through, what you thought was, maybe we'll start with the benefit of doubt. What do you think was good about that special? And then what are the things you feel were not accurately or well discussed?
I think overall the entire 3-part series wasn't well discussed to set guys up properly for the notion of marriage today, especially in the West. Overall, I like Jordan. I think he's done a good job. I especially appreciate the way he handles the woke mob and, the rabid left sort of like interviews and conversations. I think he's great at that. But his whole strategy with the 3-part series on Daily Wire on marriage is really just man up, don't be a wimp, just get married, negotiate between yourselves. But it's got more holes than a block of Swiss cheese, if I'm being honest. And that's the point of that Twitter thread. And I also did a podcast episode breaking down everything that I came across and what I thought of it. And I just kind of fed back on all the points there. So, there's quite a few. Where do you want to start with?
Well, look, let's pull on, let's say, what do you think are the top 3 holes in the Swiss cheese here that he doesn't address properly or sets people up for failure?
Yeah. So one of the most glaring problems that I saw with his push for guys to just man up and get married was it relies on a lot of negotiation. He seems to think, or comes from an era where men and women are equally accountable and will take ownership in equal regards. They're both committed. He doesn't take into account a lot of the problems that are out there today, which I'll get into in just a sec. But like the real problem is he's basically suggesting that men and women can sit down and negotiate all of their differences right down to where the scissors go in the appliance drawer. And that might have worked in his marriage, but I don't think the reality of the world today would work for most men. And even though men are more apt to want to take ownership, I think, especially if they're followers or listeners of his work, he doesn't have a lot of female followers from what I understand, and women aren't particularly interested or good at taking ownership for things that go on in their life. Men are more disposable, women are more protected, women are always forgiven, men are always blamed. Like there are differences between the sexes, and I don't think that he gives an honest breakdown of those differences, even though he does talk about some differences, but he doesn't get down to like the nitty gritty stuff that I really get into, especially with the chapter in my book on why smart men don't marry. Like I really break it down in depth there.
I think, so one area I think I would strongly agree with you on. So I'm a avid student of history. And if you look at most of history, there wasn't a negotiation between the husband and the wife. Negotiation basically implies that two people are coming to the table with either equal power, equal status. And I think you discussed this quite well in your book, but women naturally seek a higher status man, and the fact that you're negotiating with your man implies that you're of the same status, which is fucking backwards. It's starting from the wrong place in the first place.
Correct. One of the things he said, I'm just opening up the tweet, is that he doesn't like the idea of a male-led marriage, essentially at the head of the household. He didn't use his exact words, but he calls the idea of not using negotiation between the husband and wife tyranny and slavery, and advocates for equality and negotiation down to every single detail, which is absurd. I mean, like the most successful marriages that I've known, that have been together for 20, 25, 30 years. Again, my demographic is slightly different because most of my friends are mostly entrepreneurs, successful leaders out there. But they use words like, blue jobs and pink jobs, right? I'm the guy, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm running the business. She runs a household. I'm not that concerned with things like where the scissors go in the appliance drawer. They go where she wants to put them. But at the same time, they also have boundaries too, where they don't have all of their stuff sequestered to some ridiculous corner of the house, like a man cave, where the entire house is all pink foo-foo and flowers and, curtains and chandeliers and stuff like that, that women would tend to overly decorate with many houses. They still have some manliness to the house, right? But there's a lot of guys out there that have man caves. And my position on that is you're a pussy. I mean, if you buy a house and you surrender the entire house to a woman, then how is that your house, right? If she forces you to put all of your stuff in some dark corner of the basement or in the garage.
Yeah. You're like a fucking child in that case, like an overgrown child.
You're an accessory to her life. You're the ATM that pays for everything so that she can, milk it to put all this stuff all foo-foo and fruffy, throughout the house.
Totally. Okay. So point number one is the negotiation is a ridiculous concept between men and women. What do you think is the second big Swiss cheese hole?
He says also that you just can't love a woman, right? Which I think is bullshit. I mean, I've got a girlfriend. I love her to bits. We have a great relationship. We've been together for quite a while now. But he claims that for you to love a woman, that you need to stand up in front of your whole community and bind yourself to that commitment. And if you don't do it, he'll call you shallow if you try to avoid that. There was a bunch of other disparaging words that he used as well to men that try to avoid the risks of marriage. He used foolish, juvenile, short-sighted, hedonistic, nihilistic, cynical, psychopathic, impulsive, promiscuous, pathetic 40-year-old frat boys, scoundrels, and half-wits. So I guess I'm all of those things because I've chosen not to expose my wealth or my life to the risks of family law, because he just completely overlooks the fact that when you get married in the West, if you get married in Canada or many of the states down in the US, in the UK, for example, many places
Australia,
in Europe. Even,
same thing.
Yeah, Australia, New Zealand. If it doesn't work out, which 7 to 10 years down the road, about 50% of the time it doesn't, you have to untie the knot, and women initiate that about 80% of the time. All of those nasty words that he's calling you won't matter at all, because you're going to lose half of your stuff in some cases. In Australia, I know that some men have lost more than half of their stuff, and quite often are alienated from their own children, and they just watch their wealth flow from their investments to her while she separates him from his kids. So there's no real, it's a lot of shaming language. Like, if you don't wife her up, then you're a pussy, you're not a man. There's no, hey, things have changed in the West, and you might want to consider these things or vet women properly in this sense. Like, one of the most simplest vetting tools that guys can use is don't marry a promiscuous woman. Like, I'm not against having kids. I'm not against, being with women. The problem is that marriage is very, very high risk and low reward for men, especially successful men. And it's low risk and high reward for women, especially when they marry across and up the socioeconomic scale, which 95% of the time they do. There's always that, one person that's in the comments saying, well, I'm a stay-at-home dad and my wife goes to work and it works out fine for us. Sure. Okay. But does she still fuck you enthusiastically? Or are you just, projecting your story? Because the vast majority of women that end up in a scenario where they marry a guy that doesn't bring home the bacon that they do far better than, they're not interested in that man, right? They generally go out and have affairs, right?
So, okay, I want to pull on on that thread a little bit. So when you say that the marriage component, so the legalization by the state is basically a bad practical step because it opens you up from a legal perspective. Isn't the law written these days such that even if you just live with a woman, like where you're not married on paper, etc., she still has claim? Okay.
Correct. So, here where I live, common law is 2 years. There's other places where it could be anywhere from 2 to 7 years. But common law is something that you have to be aware of and you have to consider if you're going to invite a woman into your life and to live with you. Because here, if I live with a woman for 2 years and a day, the government considers us married. And if we were to part ways and, leave, she would be entitled to half my stuff, right? Would she take it? I don't know. But if you can enrich yourself and make millions of dollars by telling a guy to pound sand and leave, and if you're mad at him, maybe he cheated on you or something like that, and you're really upset, well, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So why wouldn't she take half your stuff, right? It's not, guys don't take a practical, rational, woken, approach to getting married. They usually just walk into a slaughterhouse blindfolded because culture, society, religion, Disney movies, everything that they've grown up on and they're drunk on tells them just get married and she'll be faithful and loyal and raise your children and love you forever until death do us part, blah, blah, blah. But for most guys, that's really not the case. And when you look at the stats, and I covered it in my book, The Unplugged Alpha, only 13% of people together over, I think it was 8.3 years was the average time frame, were still in love. And only 3% of people were in a state of bliss. So the chances of you living out that state of bliss that they've sold us, like the marriage contract, the social contract of just commit to her and she'll commit to you and everything will be amazing. The chances of that happening are actually quite small. There's things that you can do to manage that, to improve the odds. Again, one of the things I was talking about earlier is don't invite a promiscuous woman into your life, because very, very simply, you're going to have conflicts in a relationship. She's not going to like something that you're doing, or maybe something that you say, or a boundary that you set. And if she's been with 100 different guys, or been in 50 different relationships, or 40 different relationships, or whatever that happens to be, if she's been with a lot of men, the chances of her forming a healthy monogamous pair bond to you over a long-term basis diminishes massively with every guy that she's been with. This is statistically proven. A woman that's been with a lot of guys that lost her virginity at a young age is a terrible choice for marriage. But he doesn't talk about that in his 3 lectures on marriage. He just says, man up, don't be a pussy, be a man, take your vows in front of people, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, that's interesting, but there's so many things that are being missed here. And unfortunately, I believe that 3-part series is going to ruin a lot of men's lives, but it is what it is, right? People love that stuff.
Yeah. Well, to the problem with marriage. So when I was younger, I had a real problem with marriage, and I think it was just, young, crazy, driven 20-year-olds, etc. We're all sort of anti-state in some way, shape, or form. So that was generally my beef. In the last couple of years, I've kind of changed my opinion a little bit on it, in the sense that I think modern culture and sort of the liberalism that has emerged, particularly since, once again, adding a little history here, is like since the days of the French Revolution, and then everything that sort of happened, particularly in the last 100 years with, women empowerment and driving women into careers and all this sort of shit. What's happened is that, men are no longer the kind of the functional patriarchy that may have existed before. Correct. Is gone. And we're in a situation where, I actually find it stupid that women are out there chasing careers. I actually think that that's a fucking man's job.
And that's something that's a more newer type of realization for me. Like, there was a good time in my 20s and even early 30s where I thought, man and a woman, twin towers, we'll conquer the world together. But you can't have 2 people driving the car. There has to be one person in the passenger seat and one person in the driver's seat. And traditionally and historically, men have generally led, and they've generally had authority over their family, but they also had responsibility to their family. Totally. Right? They had the responsibility to shelter, to feed, to protect, to provision, to be competent, to solve problems. They had all of these responsibilities, whereas women were more responsible for, taking care of the children and the household and nurturing and loving and caring and feelings and stuff like that. The problem is that today men still have responsibility to the household, state enforced, especially if there's a divorce, but they have almost no authority in the household. Now, the authority in the household is the woman / the state. If you get divorced, anybody that goes through the divorce grinder in the West understands how little control they have over their life. The government and their soon-to-be ex-wife has almost all of the control in that equation, and they're just a pleb. They're like a dead fish, going downstream with the current. Basically, they don't have much control whatsoever. It's kind of like hang on for the ride and do the best that you can. And there's some strategies that I talk to guys about with that as well too, when it comes to divorce. But that's the real problem: is that men have authority men have responsibility without the authority. And when you have a situation like that, that's essentially slavery. I really hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to watch the full-length podcast, you can find that over here, that clip's from. If you're newer to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe over here, and pin down below in the top comment, you'll find a bunch of useful links to my website, my supplement line, books, and a bunch of other stuff. Have an amazing day. Peace out.